Welcome to the deep dive. You've sent in your sources, and, well, our job is to dive depth, pull out the interesting bits, and make sense of it all for you.
Exactly.
So today we're sort of putting on our paleontologist hats, metaphorically speaking.
Definitely. We're digging into the world of a specific dinosaur, Baurutitan,
Mm-hmm.
all based on the scientific papers you provided.
Right, Baurutitan, a titanosaur from Brazil, late Cretaceous. The sources cover its classification, how it was found, what it looked like, its family tree, all that good stuff.
Yeah, it's a great case study. We'll trace its story, from the first bone found to the ongoing scientific debates. It's about bringing this giant back to life, piece by piece, through the science.
Okay, let's get into it. Baurutitan. Even the name sounds massive, and the story kicks off in 1957.
That's right, 1957 with Llewellyn Ivor Price. He was a very well-known Brazilian paleontologist.
And he was working in Minas Gerais, Brazil, that Perópolis area.
Exactly, a really fossil-rich spot. But what's interesting is how he found out about this specific site. It wasn't just him stumbling upon it. No, he actually got a tip-off from someone named Jesuino Felicissimo Jr.
From the Instituto Geográfico e Geológico of São Paulo.
Precisely. It highlights that collaboration, that sharing of information. Even back then, science isn't always done in isolation.
That's a great point. So this tip led Price to an old quarry, Quarry Caera.
Yep, Corey Caera on the San Luis farm.
Yeah.
And it turned out to be much more than just Baurititan.
Okay. So what else was there?
Oh, it was a real treasure trove, like a snapshot of the late Cretaceous ecosystem. They found turtles, crocodilomorphs.
Those are the ancient croc relatives?
Right. And theropods, meat eaters, other sauropods too.
Right.
Plus fish, freshwater snails, clams,
Ah.
trace fossils like footprints maybe,
Yeah.
dinosaur eggs, even plant fossils. It paints a really vivid picture.
And get this, the sources mentioned dynamite being used sometimes in the excavation.
Yeah. Can you imagine?
A bit dramatic, a literal blast from the past.
It really underscores the challenges they faced. I mean, effective for moving rock maybe, but risky for the fossils.
Definitely. Methods have thankfully become a bit more delicate since then.
Much more precise.
Yeah.
Makes you appreciate that these bones survived it all.
So amongst all this material, Price finds this series of vertebrae, 19 of them.
Yes, the last sacral, that's the one connected to the hips, and then 18 tail vertebrae, caudals.
And they were just called Series C initially.
Just a field designation, basically, Series C. But these specific bones became really important later on.
How so?
Well, fast forward to 2005, a publication by Kellner and colleagues officially named Baurutitan. And that Series C, specimen MCT 1490R, became the holotype.
The holotype, that's the main reference specimen for the species, right?
Exactly. The one everything else is compared to. It gave this discovery a formal identity.
And all these finds ended up at the Museo de Ciencia da Terra in Rio.
That's right, the Earth Science Museum. Kept safe for study.
Okay, so we've dug it up. Now the name, Baurutitan, what's the story there?
Well, it's pretty descriptive. Bauru refers to the Bauru group.
The geological formation where it was found.
Exactly, ties it to the place. And Titan, well, that's common for these huge sauropods, evokes the giants from Greek mythology. Size and origin, right in the name.
Makes sense. And the species name, britoi.
That's an honorific. It honors Ignacio Aureliano Machado Brito.
Another Brazilian paleontologist.
Yes, who advised on the study. The paper mentions he provided guidance, especially since the fossils had been in storage for quite a while before being formally described. It's a nice nod to his contribution.
Okay, let's zoom out. Where does Baurutitan fit in the grand scheme of life? The classification seems pretty detailed.
It is. I mean, it goes all the way up. Domain Eukaryota, Kingdom Animalia, Phylum Chordata.
The basics for animals with spinal cords.
Right. Then Dinosauria, of course. Sauriskia, the lizard-hipped ones. Sauropodomorpha, the long-necked plant-eaters group. Then Sauropoda itself.
And within Sauropoda.
It gets more specific. Macronaria. Then Titanosauria, that massive group of Cretaceous sauropod.
Getting warmer.
Then Lithostrotia, which is a subgroup within Titanosauria. And finally, genus Baurutitan, type species Baurutitan britoi. Kellner et al., 2005. That's its full address.
Phew. Quite the lineage. And time-wise, when was it around?
Late Cretaceous. Specifically the Maastrichtian epoch, so roughly 72 to 66 million years ago.
Right at the very end of the age of dinosaurs.
Just before the big extinction event, yeah.
And discovering it was a big deal for Brazilian paleontology.
Oh, definitely. It was only the fourth sauropod formally named from Brazil at the time, after Antarctosaurus, Gondwanatitan, and Amazonsaurus. So each find like this really added to the picture of South America's dinosaurs.
Okay, we know the who, where, when. What about the size? How big was this titan?
The estimates based on the bones we have put it around 12 to 14 meters long.
So maybe 39 to 46 feet.
Roughly, yeah. About 3.5 meters or 11 feet tall at the shoulder, perhaps. A decent size for sure, but not one of the absolute supergiants.
And what really made it stand out? What defined it as Baurutitan versus its relatives?
The key thing mentioned is the unique structure of its caudal vertebrae.
Those tailbones again.
Exactly. The specific shapes and features of those vertebrae were distinct enough to separate it from other titanosaurs found nearby or described previously. It's often these subtle details in the bones that tell the evolutionary story.
The tail tells the tale. Okay, now things seem to get a bit tangled, right? Relationships with other titanosaurs, especially Trigonosaurus.
Yes, this is where the detective work gets really interesting and where science is still, working things out. There's another site nearby called Point 6 or Rodovia.
Also in the same formation.
Yes, Serra de Galga Formation. And in the 80s and 90s, they found a lot of titanosaur bones there. Vertebrae, limb bones, quite a mix.
Okay.
And initially, researchers noticed something intriguing. Some neck and back vertebrae looked a bit like Trigonosaurus, another titanosaur from the area.
Right.
But the tail vertebrae from that same site, they looked more like Baurutitan.
So bones resembling two different dinosaurs found together.
Kind of, yeah. Which raised questions. Then, a big study came out in 2022 by Silva Jr. and colleagues. They looked closely at all this material from Point 6.
And what did they find?
They found features shared with both Baurutitan and Trigonosaurus, which led them to a pretty bold proposal.
Which was?
They suggested that Trigonosaurus isn't actually a separate genus. They proposed it's a junior synonym of Baurutitan.
Whoa, hold on. So they think Trigonosaurus and Baurutitan are actually the same dinosaur.
That was their conclusion, based on analyzing all that material together. Basically, two names for one animal.
Okay.
And they went further. They argued that the Trigonosaurus paratype specimen, a secondary reference fossil, was actually something different altogether. They proposed separating it out into a brand new genus, Chieria.
Wow, okay. So instead of Baurutitan and Trigonosaurus, they're suggesting it's Baurutitan and this new one, Chieria.
That's the hypothesis put forward in that 2022 paper. A significant reshuffle.
But I gather this isn't settled science yet.
Not entirely. The sources mentioned John Fronimos argued against this synonymy in 2023.
Oh, what was his reasoning?
He pointed to differences, specifically in the first caudal vertebra, between the original Baurutitan holotype and the Trigonosaurus material. He felt those differences were significant enough to keep them separate.
So the debate continues. It really highlights how tricky it is working with incomplete fossils, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's a puzzle with missing pieces, and different researchers might interpret the available pieces slightly differently.
So pending further evidence, where does the latest analysis place Baurutitan, maybe including that Trigonosaurus info?
Well, a 2023 phylogenetic analysis, basically a dinosaur family tree study, took that 2022 interpretation into account. It placed Baurutitan, defined more broadly incorporated Trigonosaurus holotype, within a group called Aeoloceraini.
Aeoloceraini, okay.
Which itself is part of a larger group called Rinconsauria.
And who else is in that particular club? Any familiar names?
Yeah, the analysis included Rinconsauris, Uberabtitan, Gondwanatan, another Brazilian one we mentioned, Bravosaurus, Chieria, that potential new genus, Wielandsaurus, Ovirosaurus, Uridatitan, different species of Aeolosaurus, and Punatitan. It gives a clearer picture of its likely closest relatives based on current understanding.
It's fascinating how these relationships get mapped and remapped. There was also a mention of a 2017 study about Patagotitan.
Yes, the study describing the giant Patagotitan. In their analyses, Carbolito and colleagues placed Baurutitan within the broader group Lithostrotia.
Okay, so Lithostrotia seems consistent.
It does. The 2023 analysis placing it within Aeoloceraini and Rinconsauria is more specific, nested within Lithostrotia. So both studies agree on its membership in that major advanced titanosaur group. The newer study just refines its position further down the branches, shows how science builds on previous work.
Okay, so let's wrap up this deep dive on Baurutitan. We started with its discovery back in '57.
Thanks to Price following that tip-off.
Right. We looked at its name, its formal classification, its eyes pretty big, but not the biggest.
And those distinctive tailbones.
The crucial tailbones. And then we navigated this whole complex situation with Trigonosaurus and its current spot in the Titanosaur family tree.
Exactly. It's a story that starts decades ago, but is still unfolding through ongoing research and debate.
And that debate really hangs in the air, doesn't it? The whole Tyrannosaurus synonymy question. It really makes you think about the challenges of paleontology.
It definitely does. Working with fragments, interpreting subtle differences, it's complex work.
So, a final thought for you listening. Think about how one discovery, made so long ago, can keep generating new questions and revisions. How much else about the ancient world might change as we find new fossils or develop new ways to analyze them? What other established ideas might face challenges down the road?
It's a good reminder that science is always a work in progress, always refining the picture based on the best available evidence, a dynamic process.